where I was a few years ago, I was in this repetitive cycle that was 24/7, and I was just going round and round, panic attacks every day, symptoms getting worse, anxiety getting worse, and I didn't know what was going on. I literally thought I was dying because that's what it felt like. And that's what happens when you get to this point right here, when you're panicking all the time and they're huge panic attacks and you have tons of symptoms.
I can take on anything now in my life.
I'm now currently living a life in which I never thought I would be able to ever live again.
Hey guys, so I wanted to make this video just to share my experience and my journey of going through, whatever we want to call it, CFS or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. But basically it's when you're bedridden due to all these weird symptoms you're having, and it's kind of unexplainable. If you're watching this right now, then you're probably sick and, typed in chronic fatigue syndrome cure or fibromyalgia, more information. But having gone through an experience where I was bedridden for a full year, to the point where I couldn't even roll over in bed, I couldn't even feed myself sometimes. I was hospitalized for 2 months, going through all that and being able to have a full, robust recovery. I thought I'd just hop on here and share with you guys kind of what helped me recover. And, just 2.5 years ago, I was not able to sit up out of bed. In fact, I have my notes here that I used to write when I was very, very, very sick. I used to write down all my thoughts, all the things I wanted to do when I got better, because I practically gave up hope, and I wanted to give up hope, thousands and thousands of times, where, to be honest, I didn't even want to be around anymore because it was so bad. I was a personal trainer at the time, right before I got sick. I just bought my dream car, which is a Nissan 370Z. I just, got a new girlfriend, which was amazing. I was a top trainer at a gym. I was making the most money I've ever made. I was running a clothing company. I had all these dreams and aspirations, and everything just pretty much hit a wall. And it happened so fast where I lost everything, and I had to pretty much reinvent myself. So just a disclaimer, everything I'm going to show you here, take it with a grain of salt. This is just based on my experience. This is from the doctors that I've worked with and the notes that I've taken through my sessions with them. And basically from everything that I've documented, from not being able to walk or get out of bed, to being in a wheelchair, to being on a walker, to eventually, hiking up a 3-kilometer mountain in Hawaii. So this is just my experience, but, it may not work for you. Maybe it's just to give you hope, but I just wanted to share this with you guys today because it breaks down a lot of what helped me get better. And a lot of it starts with understanding what is going on inside the body. Because right now you probably have a million different questions and you're probably searching in a million different places for answers, and all you're getting is, maybe you have Lyme's disease or early onset of Parkinson's or Addison disease or severe adrenal fatigue, which totally could be true, but maybe you've gotten those tests and, you tested negative for them. So you're still left with all these questions of what's going on, and the doctors might not be telling you anything. They might just be telling you that's all in your head, which for me, it absolutely was in my head. But here's the thing, I was feeling real severe pain to the point where my body almost shut down, to the point where they had to give me oxygen multiple times. I was in the hospital, literally spoon fed. I was in intensive care unit for 3 weeks because there was a serious problem going on. So, just because it was in my head doesn't mean it wasn't real physical pain. And, there's a difference between it being in your head and there being an actual problem with your brain. And that's where I want to get at today. But just to start out, I want to start with, let's just understand how our brain was primed. So let's just say, at least I'm really just relaying the message that my doctors told me and what's worked for me and helped me understand how to come out the other end, how to see this thing through and come out the other side a better person. Essentially, we got to look at evolution and learn what has a history of the brain been. And this is all going to make sense in a little bit here, but let's just start off with the basics. So for about 200,000 plus years, right, we were hunter-gatherers. So our mind was wired for danger. It was wired to protect us against all these different things that could kill us. We would have to go into the forest and expose ourselves to dangers every single day. Maybe there's lions in the forest, maybe there's poisonous snakes, maybe there's a sharp rock, or maybe there's a cliff that people knew not to go to, right? So our minds were primed to look for danger and to be anxious, and that's completely normal. So that was like that for 200,000 years. Now, fast forward in the last 10,000 years, that's when things change, So in the last 10,000 years, it was the agriculture revolution, right? So the agriculture revolution, that means people didn't have to go out and expose themselves to danger in the jungles as much as they did before. So, they could farm, they could do farming. But the big thing you got to take away from this is there was a lot less danger. Less danger because there was less exposure. However, our mind is still primed to look for danger. It's a defense mechanism. So agriculture, there was a lot less danger, a lot less threat. Now, if we look at the last 200 years, that was the Industrial Revolution. And if you know a little bit about the Industrial Revolution, that's basically when we no longer had to go out at all. So there was practically no threat, at least, like before. There were no lions, there were no snakes, there was no cliffs. There wasn't really any danger. There weren't really any threats other than social threats. But, our perception of danger was disrupted. So while our mind is here looking for lions and snakes and, diseases, we could go to sleep at night knowing that our village wasn't going to get attacked by some cougars or whatever because, the Industrial Revolution happened. We had locks on our doors. We had access to food. We didn't have to go out venturing into the forest, right? So the threats were not there. So the thing here is your mind doesn't know the difference between real danger and false danger, right? There's real danger, which is, maybe you have to go out into the jungle, but false danger is different, right? So nowadays, maybe you have a job interview and, there is no real danger to that, but you still think you're in danger because, you're at risk of, not making money or being judged or not being the right fit and being rejected, right? However, this job interview, which technically there is no real danger, we perceive it the same as something like, trying to calm a wild gorilla. And this is just an example, right? So here we have something that most people are get really nervous for, or even public speaking is even better, right? Most people are afraid of public speaking. Now, our mind doesn't know the difference between the anxiety we feel here and the anxiety we feel here. So we still feel like we're trying to calm a gorilla or, stay out of danger, or we still feel that there is a threat around us. However, the truth is there is no threat, but our perception of danger was disrupted when we went from hunter-gatherers to the Industrial Revolution. Now, what happens when the danger goes down, but our brains are still primed to look for danger, which is basically our defense mechanism, right? So the danger went down, but our brain's defense mechanism stayed the same. Now what happens is you start getting all this anxiety, all this stress about danger that actually doesn't exist. So what that looks like is, if you think about anxiety, right? Think about it like a rocket ship leaving the Earth. Let's say if this is the Earth, there's an atmosphere around Earth, right? Now, in spaceflight, most of the energy is actually used up when they're trying to leave the atmosphere. So literally from here to here. Now, if this was Mars and the spaceship's going all the way there, most of that energy is used up in the beginning phases. So this is kind of like a drawing of the Earth. What happens is, in order to break through the atmosphere, in order to break through, to get out into actual space, most of the energy is used to push through here. So it's basically what's called a velocity threshold. Now, once it breaks this point, this is the breaking point, then there is no turning back. That spaceship is going to go all the way to Mars, right? But if it doesn't break that barrier, it's just going to fall back to Earth. Now, this is the crucial tipping point right here. This is where the velocity threshold is reached, where it's going, and then boom, it just takes off, right? Now, it's the same thing with anxiety. And this is the part that, got me thinking. I'm like, this is, holy cow, I can totally relate to this. So what the doctor showed me was, now think of your anxiety, and your anxiety builds up, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up. Let's say this is an arc, right? Now, let's say velocity threshold is here in order to do like the full swing of things. Every little thing here is like a symptom, right? Let's say here it's headaches, right? And maybe the second one is fast heart rate. And then maybe the third one is shortness of breath. Maybe the fourth one is heart palpitations, right? It could be anything. And if you're watching this right now and you feel like you have CFS, you probably have a multitude of these symptoms, right? I know I did. When I counted, at the most, I think I had something like 40 symptoms. It was crazy, like cold feet, sweating, insomnia, irritability, sensitivity to sound and light. But basically, as these, symptoms come on from the anxiety, it goes, and then it reaches that breaking point. Now, when you reach that velocity threshold here, that is when the full-blown panic attack kicks in, right? And I'm sure I'm not sure, but you probably felt it before, where you have a panic attack. If you haven't, then that's great, because I hope you never do experience it. But if you have, the feeling when things start to get out of control. When it hits that velocity threshold point, exactly what that feels like. When you completely lose control, it's no longer in your hands, and at that point, you're no longer in control. You can't override the primal system, the primal mechanisms that your brain has. So once you reach this point, there is no stopping that rocket. It's taken off. You can't get around this. You can only get through it. So you basically wait it out. Now, here's the interesting part. When he taught me that, when I understood that anxiety builds up and builds up and builds up, and all these issues, all this chronic fatigue doesn't come from just one thing. When he told me how it all builds up in an arc, that's when I realized, I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because there's always that velocity threshold. Now, the most important thing here is, this could go one of two ways. There's two things that can happen here. One is, you have some symptoms, you have some panic, and then let's say this is the graph, this is velocity threshold, this is panic attack right here. I'm going to write this down, panic attack. One, you could start removing some of these. In terms of symptoms, you can't really remove like a headache or just when you want to, but these can also be, stressors, like worrying about, things that might not exist. Like maybe you have a doctor's appointment that you need to get to that you won't, in your mind, you're like, there's no way I'm going to get there. And if I do, then I'm going to end up way worse, because I'm going to strain myself too much and exert too much effort. So that worrying is causing lots of stress. Now, stress builds up and up and up. And like I said, let's go back to number one. we can stop that before it reaches that threshold. And that is the key, stopping it before it reaches the threshold. Now, the second thing that could happen is, just like we said earlier, this is velocity threshold. You have symptoms, you have symptoms, you have symptoms. It doesn't stop, and boom, it does the full cycle. You hit that panic attack. So the key is recognizing when these symptoms are piling up and, stopping it before it gets to that velocity threshold. Because everything before this panic attack, you're kind of in control. You have some sort of control over. Anything after that, there is no control. And that's when you kind of just have to hold on tight and wait for it to be over. So the trick is to stop anxiety before it reaches that point. Now, that's not to say you're going to eliminate anxiety completely, but we want to limit it and make sure it doesn't reach to that point. So stop anxiety before it hits threshold. Now, let's say you do have a panic attack because, if you're in the state right now, then it's likely that you've had one or, you might have one. But let's just talk about that. So when you do have a panic attack, let's say this is let's say this is a timeline, right? And you have some anxiety, panic attack, boom. Panic attack reach. The thing about panic attacks is when you go through that full cycle of symptoms, right? There's some symptoms after, and we call that residual symptoms. And let's say it leaves a trail that slowly goes down over time, right? So that just might be you're more edgy, or you're more sensitive to quick movements or loud sounds, or you get startled more easily, or you have headaches, right? So you're going to have residual symptoms after that panic attack because it's almost like a bomb went off in your brain. Danger just went off. So you're going to be your brain is going to be more, on edge, looking for more danger, right? Now, what usually happens is there's residual symptoms. It slowly goes down, slows down. But the thing about these symptoms is they make you a bit more anxious. And so though these symptoms cause you to have more symptoms, you worry more, then boom, full-blown panic attack. And then that bigger panic attack causes more symptoms, which leads to more anxiety. And then it goes like that, right? And then so it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where you're having these, super, super panic attacks, and you're left with tons of symptoms, right? So, and if you think about it, it is really like a negative feedback loop because you're going to have anxiety, which eventually spills over to symptoms, right? Which the symptoms eventually would lead to a panic attack or some sort of crisis or meltdown or whatever. Now that panic attack leads to more symptoms. That's going to leave you, kind of like a wreck. And those symptoms are going to lead to more anxiety, which lead to more symptoms, more panic attacks, more symptoms, which leads to more anxiety. And just looking at this, you could tell that it really is like a negative feedback loop. The more it just keeps repeating itself until the whole thing gets out of control and you're constantly in a state of this whole thing. It's a cycle until, where I was a few years ago, I was in this repetitive cycle that was 24/7. And I was just going round and round, panic attacks every day, symptoms getting worse, anxiety getting worse. And I didn't know what was going on. I literally thought I was dying because that's what it felt like. And that's what happens when you get to this point right here when, you're panicking all the time and they're huge panic attacks and you have tons of symptoms. Now, everybody's different. You might not be getting actual panic attacks. You might be getting just lots and lots of symptoms. But the key is to recognize that this is how it works. It's a buildup of things. It's not something that, you just get chosen and, life does this to you because you're a bad person and it hates you. No, there's actually things that lead up to it, which that's what we're going to get into next. Now, when it comes to anxiety, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. Some people might be more at risk of it. Some people might, be more resilient to anxiety. I know me, I was more so of an anxious person. I didn't really know what anxiety was until I had my first panic attack. if you asked me when I was a kid, I wouldn't have called myself an anxious person, even though I was always overthinking. I couldn't sleep. I was a perfectionist and putting a lot of pressure on myself. But in order to understand anxiety a little bit more and why it happens, let's go back. Let's take a step back and look at kind of like life as a whole, right? And look at it from a holistic approach. So if you think about it, let's just say, this is a baseline for your life. Now, this is normal, right? This is normal. Okay. We're going to draw out your stress threshold. Okay. So the stress threshold, if this is the threshold, right? We as humans always start with a buffer. We as humans usually start with a buffer. Now, let's say we start down here. Basically, we have all that space to play with until we reach that stress threshold and we have a panic attack. Now, this is the critical tipping point. This is basically like that other diagram where you hit that, you have symptoms, then you hit that velocity threshold or breaking point, then you have a full-blown panic attack. This is that velocity threshold. Now, we all start with, a pretty large buffer for stress. Some people might start with less. Some people might start here. Me, I was probably a bit less. I had a bit less of a threshold than most people because I know people who do a lot worse things than I was doing to their body, and they never had a panic attack. But for people like us, if you're watching this video, you're probably, you've probably had a smaller threshold, or you've done a lot to reduce this threshold. Now, let's talk about that. How does this threshold get reduced, and how do people get to that tipping point? Well, the more stress you have, the closer you'll get, and it's basically like a staircase. So let's say you grow up and you're a perfectionist, right? Let's say you're a perfectionist, which is kind of like mental stress. Basically, that's going to move you. That's like a big step. Basically, that's like one huge hurdle. And that's going to make your stress threshold smaller. So you're a perfectionist. Maybe you are stressed with money, right? That's going to make you have a smaller threshold. And maybe you have family problems or whatever, relationships. Relationships, right? That's going to give you less of a threshold. And then maybe you're not getting enough sleep, right? So lack of sleep, smaller threshold. Maybe your diet is not on point and you eat lots of junk food, or you don't eat healthy, or you don't drink enough water, smaller threshold. Now, once you get here, as you can see, you don't have much threshold. You don't have much buffers and much cushion. So what happens is when you have all these stressors stacked up on top of each other, then it's going to be so much easier for you to become anxious. That's why when people get overwhelmed or they have so much on their plate, they get stressed a lot easier, because this buffer is way smaller. And once you hit that buffer, you have that first little bit of anxiety or panic attack. That's when you kind of lose control. Now, it might be that some small thing can push you over the edge. So maybe here your car gets towed, which is pretty stressful. But if you compare it to all this, it's actually not that bad compared to your family and money and being a perfectionist your whole life and sleep and diet. It might just be this little thing. Your car gets towed, or you get a parking ticket, right? Parking ticket. Something small like that can push you over the edge. Really anything, because if your buffer is small, your buffer is small. So we have to keep in mind the crucial tipping point. You have to keep in mind, what are the stressors you have in your life, right? And a lot of these, it's perception. That's why the mind is so powerful, is you don't need to be a perfectionist. You have to train your brain to change and not do that. And we'll talk about that later. That's called neuroplasticity. But you have control over being a perfectionist. You can learn to let go. And it's not easy. I've done it myself, having to go through this whole recovery and this whole journey over the past few years. But I was always a perfectionist. Now, not so much anymore. And I live a lot happier. Money. A lot of times, a lot of stress is unnecessary. Maybe you make $2,000 a month or $3,000 or $1,000, whatever, or you have enough to live and have a roof over your head and eat and put food on the plate. then there would be no reason to stress about money. Now, if you do have financial struggles, then that makes sense because you can't just ignore it or put it aside. But if you can control it, if it is in your control, then there is no need to worry about it, because what that does is it decreases your cushion. And as you see here, it's going to bring you closer to that crucial tipping point. And we want to stay as far away from this as possible. Maybe sleep, right? You can control your sleep. Sometimes if you have insomnia, that's a whole different story. But for the average person who hasn't reached that, that phase yet where they have severe insomnia, just go to bed earlier. Even if you don't sleep, just lie in bed, close the lights, and turn off your cell phones, computers, and just take a minute to relax, right? And diet is one of the biggest ones. Is you have control over your diet, or maybe you have family members or relatives helping you, or friends or girlfriends, spouses. You need to get them to understand that diet plays a huge role. Now, for me, I was eating very, very extremely healthy when I was bedridden, but I was actually getting even worse. But, compared to if I was eating really bad food, I'm sure this was the much better option. So just keeping in mind that you need to keep that threshold, as big as possible. You want to give yourself a big cushion so that you set yourself up to win. Now, the more stresses you have, some people can handle more, some people can handle less. If you look at supervisors of companies or CEOs, they'll probably have like 100 of these little problems, all these fires they have to put out in their workplace, dealing with all these people, but they've trained their mind to be able to handle all of that. And maybe, it doesn't affect them as much because they're able to just let it go and not stress about it. Now, when you do get to this point, that's exactly what I meant before. Once you have all those symptoms, which as you get closer here, you'll start to get more and more symptoms until you reach that breaking point where, you'll reach that velocity threshold, have a panic attack or a breakdown or whatever, a crisis, and then you'll have residual symptoms, and then you'll have more and then more and then more. Now, typically what my doctor told me is if you don't focus on retraining your mind and understanding these principles, and maybe even get some help with medication. At least they gave me simple medication, which I'm almost completely off now. I'm going to be off it by the end of the year, which had really no side effects on me, just in the beginning, maybe some nausea, but it's nothing compared to what I went through when I was sick. With the right medication and the right way of dealing with symptoms and building a threshold, unless you have those things in place, usually once you hit this point, it's kind of game over. You're always going to have these problems until you get the right help. Now, what he told me was there's 3 ways to fix this. If you're deep in a very, very deep kind of hopeless pit right now, there's 3 things to really focus on, not overcomplicate it. Literally, these 3 things are what helped me get so much better and almost, brought miracles into my life that I never thought were possible. I never thought I could walk again or, go for a run. I just went for a run yesterday, 2-kilometer run on the beach. And I dreamed of that 2.5 years ago. And that was impossible 2.5 years ago. But one, you got to deal with the panic attacks. At least for me, that's what it was. It was dealing with the panic attacks or crashes. That's what we called it sometimes. But the panic attacks, the way to deal with that was, at least for me, it was through medication. And I was taking SSRIs or antidepressants. I was taking one of them, which was sertraline, and clonazepam for a short bit. Clonazepam. And I took that for about 6 months, a very small dose. And then after 6 months, I was able to get rid of this. And today I'm taking 1/4 the dose I'm taking of this stuff. And, I feel great. So number 1, dealing with panic attacks, which with me, they help me through medication. Number 2 is dealing with somatic symptoms. Now with somatic symptoms, it's, what he told me, he really stresses that your success is determined by how well you respond or deal with symptoms. Your success is determined by how well you respond with symptoms. So the trick here is to understand how symptoms work, how pain and anxiety works. Now, what he taught me was think about anxiety like a magnifying glass, right? Let's say anxiety equals magnifying glass. Now, if you have a magnifying glass, it basically, it magnifies things. So let's say if there's a small spider, right? Let's say a small spider right here. It's tiny. Let's say it's literally this small. It's tiny. It looks harmless. I'm kind of arachnophobic. But if it's a tiny, tiny, tiny baby spider, it's not too scary. But what if you get a powerful magnifying glass? So nice big magnifying glass. This same spider, right? Let's say it's the same spider, scenario 1, scenario 2. That same spider is going to look so much bigger than before. Now, it's not real. It's just you're looking at it through that lens. Well, that's the exact same thing with anxiety. The more anxiety you have, the bigger the magnifying glass. And you've probably noticed this before. You've probably been really anxious before, and every little thing scares you. Maybe like you feel your heart pounding in your chest, or you can't sleep at night. You're overthinking, and you're stressed that you're overthinking, and that stresses you out more. So basically, this was a key thing for me. So when I started to feel symptoms when I was recovering, which I still felt symptoms for the first year out of the hospital, but it got better and better over time, and every day that I got a little bit better was like a win for me. So it was really encouraging. But when I did feel symptoms, I just forced myself to remember, like, hey, your magnifying glass is bigger right now because you're being anxious. And this magnifying glass analogy helped me so much. It helped me understand kind of what was going on, and really break things down to a science, because I'm a very analytical person. I need to see things. I'm a visual learner. And if I don't see it, then it's hard, it's not as powerful. So to see this magnifying glass, I'm like, oh yeah. It's like if I get a heart palpitation or something, just one small heart palpitation, or my heart's racing a little bit because I go up the stairs, then my brain would immediately think like, oh, is my heart going to explode? Am I going to have a heart attack? Like, am I going to get shortness of breath? Oh no, now I'm thinking about my breath. Now I have to like consciously breathe, but if I don't consciously breathe, then it's like my body forgets to breathe. It's crazy stuff, but anxiety makes you think irrationally. It doesn't make sense sometimes what you think, but in the moment, it feels real. That danger is 100% very real. So let's move on to step number 3, because I said there were 3 steps. Step number 3 is building threshold, and this is where you start to build better habits. This is where you start taking care of your body. Remember that chart that we drew out, where your threshold gets less and less the more stressors you have. Well, this step number 3 is when you rebuild that, right? So we're trying to remove these stressors. Now, there's so many things we could do about that, but a lot of it is just taking care of yourself, listening to good music or calming music or binaural beats or sound, good sounds. There's meditation, there's diet, having a proper sleep schedule, de-stressing, maybe light yoga if you can, or acupressure, go for massages, cool showers, deep breathing, which goes under meditation, taking a nice bath, so things that you really take care of yourself, that's going to help reduce a lot of this stuff. And you're really just giving your body the space it needs to heal and recover. Now, you're still going to feel some symptoms through all of this, until you're like 100% better. But basically, when it does come to symptoms, we have to understand chronic versus acute pain. So there's two types of pain, chronic and acute. Now, there's a really good book I recommend you get, like, literally right now. Like, pause this video and go download that book right now on audible.com. I think it's like $15 or something to sign up, but I'm not paid by them or affiliated by them, but this has helped me so much. It was literally like a godsend, and this is the one book that my doctor recommended that I read 100% or listen to if you know it's too strenuous on your eyes. Just listen to it in little chunks. But it's called The Brain's Way of Healing by Dr. Norman Deutsch. And I highly, highly, highly recommend, you know, anybody who's experiencing some sort of these weird symptoms, unexplainable stuff, or, you know, kind of lost hope in the medical industry because they've been told no and they turned away so many times, is to get this book 100%. It's a great listen. It has a lot of cases of people who had unexplainable things going on that they were able to fix with, you know, the methods shown in this book. But acute pain and chronic pain are two very different things. Now, acute pain is something that happens, it's sudden, right? The perfect example is you're walking down your hallway and you stub your toe on the corner. And what acute pain is, it's actually your body sending a signal to your brain saying that there's pain because there is actual danger. So that's basically your foot telling your brain to definitely not do that again because it caused pain. So think about it this way. Acute pain is your body sending pain to your brain, because all pain is, it's pain happens in your brain. It's a process that happens in your brain. Now, acute pain is real danger, right? It's maybe burning your finger on a stove or getting electrocuted from an outlet or stubbing your toe, something like that. Now, chronic pain is learned over time as a protection mechanism. Now, if you stub your toe once, you know, it's going to be okay. Let's say you stub it 100 times. You know, of course, there's still going to be pain there because you probably damage your toe. But even when there is no actual real danger to your foot, and let's say it's not actually broken or anything like that, your brain is going to continue to send signals to that area because it thinks it's still going to happen. Now, chronic pain is learned over time, which is a huge thing here. Now, if you think about it, with your symptoms, they're also all chronic symptoms. Now, at least for me, you know, I always thought my heart was going to explode, or, you know, my lungs were going to stop and I'll stop breathing. But really, that wasn't my lungs sending a signal to my brain. That was my brain sending a signal to my body, because my brain was so stressed. It was sending all these danger signals, these false signals, like a glitch in a computer, to my body. So there was no real heart issue, right? There was no real lung issue. There was no real, you know, there was no real, you know, organ failure that I thought I was going through. It was my brain sending these false signals, these false warnings to my body because it thinks it was in danger. So what you have to do is, when you do have chronic pain, you need to challenge every episode of pain with alternative stimulus of similar or greater stimulation. And that's something that came straight out of the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. Challenge every episode of pain with alternative stimulus or similar or greater stimulation. So let's say this is your brain, right? So your brain. Now, you could go down this route, which is pain, or maybe you eat on a sucker candy. Now, the reason why I liked eating sucker candies was, it lasts pretty long. You just let it melt in your mouth. It's not that unhealthy. I mean, there's a little bit of sugar in it, but you know, it's enough to get your mind away from the pain, because your brain is busy processing, you know, the taste of that candy, the texture in your mouth. So it won't be able to process that pain, especially with chronic pain, because this overrides that chronic pain. Now, it's not always the case. If you're in severe chronic pain, it's not just as simple as popping a candy in your mouth and all the pain goes away. But over time, you want to get your brain, you want to challenge the pain by having your brain distracted with these other things. Maybe it's listening to soft, good music or like a funny podcast. For me, I listened to literally hundreds of Joe Rogan podcasts over that year I was sick. And a lot of it was funny. A lot of it I was learning. So I was very distracted. So the trick is, don't get discouraged. So the trick is, don't get discouraged by all the symptoms and the setbacks, because that's going to happen. Recovery doesn't just go in a straight line up. You're going to recover, then your body's going to adjust. So you're going to feel symptoms, and then you're going to recover, adjust. The trick is, we want to move in the right direction, right? So, you're recovering, dipping. What we don't want to happen is, let's say this is recovery. You recover a little bit, you dip, then you push a little too hard, you recover, and then boom, you're down to square one. Now, we want to keep it like this. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, it's a lot harder to get that rhythm going where you're actually recovering and dipping. And these processes can, when you first start, building yourself up, these are longer apart. When you start getting better, your recovery time is a lot faster. Your symptoms are a lot less. You're able to do a lot more. But in the beginning, it's going to be very wonky. It's going to be very drawn out, and you're going to see little progress. But, it all starts with baby steps. And if you could even get 10% better than you are today, I'm sure you would be ecstatic about that. As well, recovery is kind of like a staircase. You might feel like, you're going in circles, right? Maybe you feel good, then you do activity, then you feel bad, right? But if you recover from this, you might feel like you're going in a circle, but it's not true. You're actually going in, think of it like a spiral staircase. You feel like you're in the same spot as before, but if you look, you're actually at a higher level than before. So for me, at least in the first few months, my first day trying to walk in the hospital, all I could do was get out of bed, and I felt like a wreck after. And 3 weeks later, I was able to take 20 steps across the room, and then I felt terrible after. So in both those instances, I felt terrible, right? But look at where I was at. This is day 1, this is day 20, or whatever, month 2. It's different for everybody. But I felt the same at day 1 than I did at day 20. But look at what I did. Look what I was able to do. So it's not a repetitive circle. Rather, it's a spiral staircase going up where, yeah, it looks familiar. It feels like you're going in circles, but you're actually doing a little bit more every single time you push yourself and adjust and push yourself and adjust. It's because your body is trying to find balance. It's still adjusting. So don't get discouraged from symptoms and setbacks. Just know that you don't want to push yourself so hard that you crash. But basically, that's it for me. We covered a lot of stuff in this. You're probably going to have to rewatch this video. These videos, I don't know if I'm going to break this up or not into, a few different versions, or if you sit down and watch it a few times, take notes when you do this. I mean, literally look at all the notes I took, and this isn't even all of them, because you want to drill this into your mind so that you understand it and you internalize it. Once you understand this and internalize it, you don't have to force yourself to remember all this stuff, because once you understand it, you understand where the pain is coming from, where the anxiety is coming from, what's going on. You just feel more in control, right? So we covered kind of evolution, how we've developed over the hundreds of thousands of years. We covered anxiety, and how that leads to pain, and how that leads to symptoms, which is like pain. I meant to put panic here. Anxiety and panic, and then symptoms, and how it's a negative feedback loop. We talked about how, you start with small anxiety, which could cause symptoms, which leads to bigger and then bigger and then bigger and bigger until you have a full-blown problem. We've covered how anxiety is like a magnifying glass, right? The more anxiety you have, the bigger the issues are. So increased anxiety is magnifying glass increase. We talked about stress threshold, right? Building up a threshold with good habits, removing stressors from your life, right? So building threshold. We talked about chronic pain and acute pain. Right? So chronic is your brain sending a false signal to your body, whereas acute pain, it's your body sending a signal to your brain. We talked about recovery, of how it's like a staircase, not a circle. We talked about, what else did we talk about? Oh, we talked about velocity threshold, of how when you have anxiety, it could go one of two ways. You could stop anxiety in its tracks. Two is you reach that velocity threshold and you get that panic attack. And we also talked about, one is pain management, or what is it? We also talked about panic attacks or crashes, dealing with symptoms, somatic symptoms, and building threshold. So I hope you guys got some value out of all of this. You know, I put in a lot of time into this because I wish there was something like this when I was sick, and there's a lot of good resources out there, but I never seen anything this in depth. And I was able to, you know, put this together with a psychiatrist, someone who's literally went to school for 15 years and specialized in this area of, you know, so actually, you know, I didn't even write what my problem actually was. The name for what I had was panic disorder. That's what I was diagnosed with. Or somatoform dysfunction. So it's either or, panic disorder or somatoform dysfunction. But basically, I worked with that psychiatrist. He told me that, you know, a lot of people in third world countries where there's a lot of stressors, a lot of pressure, they deal with this exact kind of thing. So, and he told me I wasn't that bad. And keep in mind, I'm in the hospital, you know, drinking a lot of my meals through a straw because I didn't even have energy to chew. And I was in so much pain. But, you know, he told me all this stuff, and, you know, I just thought it would be wrong for me not to share it with you guys. And I hope you got value out of this. Just comment down below if you have any questions at all. My passion is helping people. You know, basically my life right now is kind of like a miracle. I was definitely saved. I was definitely, you know, if it wasn't for that doctor, I don't know if I would be around anymore, to be honest. So the least I can do is share this with the world, share this with people just like yourself, in hopes that this might help you and it can better your life. So just comment down below, reach out to me. One of the easiest ways to reach out to me is on my Instagram, which is Bautista Media. I'll write it down here, at Bautista Media. Just send me a DM there, or just add me on Facebook, Miguel Bautista, and reach out. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. I hope you have a great day, and if you are going through a tough time and some struggles right now, just hang in there. It's so much better on the other side. I wanted to give up thousands of times, but you know, just hang in there, get through this. Start listening to that book, The Brain's Way of Healing, and yeah, comment down below.